purpose for running for the school board, I mean, my four main reasons are my kids. Hannah, John, they're twins that are 4. Catherine and Madeline, they're 10 and 7. I like where our school's going with their enhanced math and their arts and literature. I also like their focus on some of the ACT scores. So I want to make sure my kids, their friends, all our kids have at least the same opportunities I had. Hopefully they have more opportunities than I had, but at least the opportunities I had. Another reason I'm running is I think our teachers are important. I think we've done a great job of recruiting and keeping good teachers. We need to continue to do that. That's kind of a thing I think we should focus on. I also think there's a sense of urgency. I think we need to move on some things. We need to move on some things quickly. One of them obviously is a superintendent. And I also think that there's an importance to get our facilities up to 21st century facilities. Our kids need to have a safe place to learn, and they need to be the type of facilities that can provide everything from historical education that we've always done to new education, internet technologies. So in my 3-year term, focusing on those 4 items, my focus is teachers, curriculum, and facilities. So I would like to accomplish as much as possible with those 3 with a sense of urgency. And I think the best thing that the district has done in the last 5 years is the recruitment and our current teachers. I think our teachers are our highlight right now. I really do think we've got a strong core there that we can build on, but lots of room for improvement in a lot of different areas.
Thanks, Tyler. Libby?
I'm Libby Goldes. I'm not a Helena native. I've been here for 26 years. I was born in Des Moines, Iowa, when my father, who was in the Navy, was at sea. His career caused my family to move all over the United States and outside the continental United States also. And it was when I was in Brazil as a 12th grader that I met my husband. I went to Grinnell College my first year in Iowa. Then I transferred to the University of Minnesota, where I graduated with a degree in Portuguese and Spanish literature. I then worked at the International Student Office at Boston University, and after that got my master's in librarianship at the University of Washington. I lived then in Minnesota and Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia, where I worked as a part-time librarian and where we had our first 3 children. And after I moved here to Montana, our youngest was born. When I came on the board, she was just going to go into high school. And I was motivated to come on. I'd read about teacher strikes in Billings. It seemed that things were going pretty well here in Helena. There was good rapport between the administration and the teachers, and I was really pleased with the quality of education that my can you hear me? That my children had had, although there were some areas that I was concerned about, and I was interested in getting involved in the high school revitalization that they were talking about. Well, that child is now graduated from college, and some of the things we hope to do have yet to take place. And that's one of the reasons that I'm running again for a 4th term, and that is to bring the experience that I've gained to apply to working on the future. In the next 3 years, I hope to be able to work on improving communication with the public, addressing our facility needs, and also attending to the financial needs of the district through the legislature.
Great, thank you, Libby. John?
Hi, I'm John McEwen. I was born and raised in Lewistown, Montana, finished high school in Glasgow, went to the University of Montana where I majored in political science and economics and did student teaching, trained to be a social studies teacher. I ended up in personnel administration here with the Department of Administration, where I worked for 30 years, and along the way received a master's degree in public administration. And I've been retired now for a while, and I've had 3 children go through the Helena School system, Ian, Eric, and Ellen. And I've worked as a substitute teacher, and I was on the staff for 3 years helping to build the Science Museum, Exploration Works. I've also done a couple other things. I was a proofreader at the IR for a couple of years. That was fun. And done some HR consulting along the way. I'm currently pretty much retired. I'm interested in school issues, and I've been around schools, it seems like, my whole career, off and on, with student teaching and with children, substitute teaching, and I have time to give to a lot of these issues, and so I thought, why not give it a try? This is my second run, actually. I ran last year, finished a distant third. What I want to accomplish is to be an active member of the board and study and contribute, study the issues, contribute solutions, work hard at coming up with a decent facilities plan, and maintain the level of staff that we do have here in the school district. We have very good staff. And finally, I want to work at community communication. Thank you.
Thanks, John. John?
Hi, my name is John Rush. My background is I moved to Helena in 1975. I was born in San Francisco and lived there prior to that time. I have a wife, 2 children that graduated from Hawthorne CRA and then Capital, have since gone on to both become professionals. One is back here at St. Peter's, the other one lives in Polson. I have 2 grandchildren who have not reached the age of getting into the system, but one of them is close, which brings me back to wanting to make sure that the system not only works, the school system not only works well for them, but for all the students in Helena. The purpose for running for the board is several. One is we do need to finally get a bond put together that the public will accept. And that's the important thing, that they will accept and not just say, throw something out and see how it does. That would lead, I believe, to better performance, both for the staff and for the students, because they are in buildings that help their education. What do I hope to accomplish in that time? I hope to accomplish a sensible bond that will be acceptable to the public. The administration, as you know, is changing over. We'll need a new superintendent, new business manager, and new facilities manager. The last 2 are retiring. What has district done well? They have communicated to the public, but there's the same usual suspects. We need to get more people involved in here. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Sanjay?
All right, I'm Sanjay Talwani. I've lived here less than anyone here at this table. I've been in Helena about 6 years. I've been in Montana off and on for about 25 years, spending most of that time working either in journalism or in some kind of public relations, public engagement position. Politics, I worked for a senator for a little while, Byron Dorgan, a Democrat of North Dakota, in case you're wondering. I think I've made good use of my 6 years in Helena. I spent 3 years with the Independent Record, our hosts, and 2 years after that with KXLH TV as a statewide reporter. And that's given me the ability to really engage in a lot of different matters, meet an awful lot of people, and it's been an incredibly rewarding experience over the years to jump into my community with that intensity. I have 2 kids, a 3rd and a 5th grader. They're at Hawthorne. One will be in the largest middle school in the state, C.R. Anderson, next year. Why am I running? One of the main reasons, as folks here have already said, we need a bond, and we need a bond that the public will accept. And I think I'm in a very good position to help that bond pass, to help formulate a bond that actually will pass and help communicate with the public that this is the bond, that the bond we put forth is the best one we can do. And we are not going to pass a bond without some people changing their votes from the last time. And so we have to have a better plan and communicate it better. And I think I'm in a pretty good position to try and move that forward. What do I also hope to accomplish? I think there is a bit of a some sort of a trust issue. There is some negativity associated with the board. I think I can change that or try to improve that. What have they done in the last 5 years? I've seen amazing things with teacher creativity. I see with my kids, I see some of the ruts of the old 20th century ways of teaching and also some advantages of new ways, and I think that's a place we can continue to move forward.
Great, thank you. Our first two questions are linked, but they're two separate questions. As you know, the school board is now advertising for an interim superintendent. So the two questions have to do with an interim and then with a permanent superintendent. So what are the qualities that you would look for in an interim superintendent, and how would you determine if this interim superintendent is a good fit? So Libby, would you start, please?
Well, I believe firmly that it would be very helpful to have an interim superintendent who was familiar with our community, with this part of the country. And however, we as a board made a determination that we were opening up the application process to all candidates so that we would be able to choose the best candidate possible. But I think that that will definitely be one of the considerations. We want somebody who has strong communication skills, who's able to continue to work on the academic process that we've put so much energy into with such great results, as you may have read about this past week in the IR. That entails working with our other staff and teachers to communicate the expectations and to help, I don't know if I'm holding it too close or what, and to help overcome any challenges in that area. In addition, there remains the facilities area where we've been involving the community in more listening sessions, and we're about to take the next step. We pulled back a little bit to work on the academic areas, and that's why it's important that we have a interim superintendent who comes in, who's familiar with the types of work that we've been engaging in, with the increasing the graduation rates and the graduation expectations. We also need someone who's very familiar with budgets, because that has been one of the things that's really stymied us with the facilities approach, due to the fact that some of the things that were proposed were not supportable by the budget that we have. So we also need somebody who is able to meet with the legislature to make clear the needs of the schools in the budgetary area. Thank you.
Okay, John?
I'm not sure I see much of a difference between an interim and a permanent superintendent, but based on my background, I've done my own little job analysis of what and come up with the competencies and background that would be good. Obviously, we want someone committed to public education and to our children. We want somebody with very good communication skills, as someone said in a meeting the other day, a real extrovert who can communicate up and down the hierarchy inside the school and with the community. We want somebody willing to take chances, make decisions make sound decisions, but at the same time be creative and maybe try new things, not be afraid to try new things, but we need someone who can provide a strong leadership role, be influential in building community and building and teamwork. We want someone who is analytical and creative to provide the leadership that we need to further the initiatives underway currently and what the board wants to do in the long run. So, and that goes with, of course, there's the obvious the requirements of superintendent certification and so on that also have to be included.
Thank you, John.
Frankly, I'm not thrilled by an interim superintendent. I hired a lot of folks when I was in the phone company. I had to make those decisions quickly because the job vacancy demanded that someone get in there and pick up the work now. We have, to my count, and there may be more, at least 3 people who are qualified in this district to become superintendents by qualification of certificates. I think we need to ask if those folks would like to apply for the position, and we need to interview them first. As mentioned by other folks at this table, we want a continuum of some of the successes of the school district. I do not care for hiring what I'd call a headhunting outfit to spend time and our money to go through the state, the country, to try to find someone whom they think would fit in this district. What is my idea of the next superintendent? It has to be someone who the public trusts. Obviously, with the bond results, there's a lack of trust with the administration, and we need to rebuild that. We also need someone who's going to be long-term. This is a problem that has happened again and again. I believe in my 41 years of being in Helena, we've had about a dozen superintendents. Now, some of those were interim, some of them were hired permanently. That has got to stop. We have to look for someone who is dedicated to this district.
Thanks. I think my fellow candidates have hit many of the key elements. We certainly want someone with a lot of the technical skills that are mentioned. We need someone who's great with numbers, who's great with facilities, who's great with all the with the technicalities of what's happening in academics. It needs to be someone who communicates not just with parents and teachers and with the other administrators, but communicates outside the district as well. By that, I mean to the city, to the county, to law enforcement, to the legislature, to Washington, to everyone else who matters, which is just about, it's an awful lot of people. Philosophically, I'm interested in a futurist superintendent, someone with big ideas, someone who is ready to free teachers from some of the old ways that, through the fault of no one, are just hanging on from the 20th century, and someone who can empower teachers to use their innovation to meet the kids where they need to be met and in the ways they need to be met. I'm glad that Chair Myrie said at a meeting or so ago that this needs to be a very transparent process from start to finish. The meetings need to be open. Any emails the board administration receives from anyone that recommends specific people, that needs to be out there in the public. We shouldn't have to go out and figure that stuff up. If we're going to have transparency in the meetings here, that includes transparency in all communications. That applies to any quasi-judicial body. But as far as who this person is, to some degree, no matter who it is and who we get and where they're coming from and whether we have an interim and then a new person, the board to some degree and the community is going to have to take the lead on what the superintendent does and not just wait for someone to come in on a white horse, save the day with great ideas. When we get new people in, we have to have a pretty good plan in place of where we're going to push that superintendent and how we're going to manage that manager. So it's on us regardless of who it is.
I guess I'll show you the difference in management styles between me and the other candidates, I guess. If we had a vice superintendent, you lost your superintendent, I would just hire the vice superintendent. I'd start the recruit right away for the permanent solution. I don't think I would try to do that process twice. I think it takes a little time. I think we do have a sense of urgency. I talked about that earlier. So I would move the vice superintendent up, and I would start the process for a permanent superintendent right out the gate. The individual I'd look for is someone who has successful experience. Someone who just has experience from another location or within our location, but it's not successful experience. I don't know if we need to hire someone else's fire or hire someone else's retire. We need to find someone who has success in looking at the things that we want to do now. So you can look at our agenda, you can look at our mission, say, okay, here's what we want to accomplish. Let's find someone who's done that successfully. Let's hire someone who knows how to do this. I think you want somebody with really strong character. From what I can tell, you have to have pretty thick skin in that position. Someone who's going to have to be extremely strong communicator, have a lot of patience, and someone that can help us network with both our private and public sectors. I think when you look at the numbers we're looking at when you talk about facilities, this is a big hole. We need a big shovel to fill this hole. So we got to be able to work both public, both private. We got to work with the city. We got to work with the county. But we're going to have to find somebody who's really strong at communication and working with the whole community.
Great, thank you, Tyler. As I said, the second question is linked to the first one. What are you looking for in a long-term superintendent? So once the interim is finished, the new person comes on board. What are you looking for? You'll have a minute and a half to respond to this. And John McEwen, you'll start.
I'm not sure I would look for something different in a permanent versus the interim. Again, the key thing, the leadership, the creativity, the problem solving, commitment to our schools, to our community. I'd like somebody, that's willing to take some risks, but has enough wherewithal as to know when to let go of the rope if something isn't working. And that's a cowboy term, not a mountain climber term. Like I say, I've thought about this a lot, and hopefully that person that we hire on the interim, because the job is open, and there'll be applicants, I assume, from around the state, if not the region, there is the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, which is to hire the interim, and then if it in 6 months' time, if the board likes them, then skip that second recruitment.
As far as a long-term superintendent, I think I've already expressed my interest. I don't care for an interim. I think we need to go right to the gentleman or the lady who will be our superintendent for quite a long time to come. Again, this person needs to engender trust among the public, something that seems to have seeped away. Again, your results or the indication, the example of that is the bond. This person needs to understand the district. I know this sounds petty, but there is a difference between being a Bengal and a Bruin. And that person needs to understand that and not just cut across those lines willy-nilly. And that superintendent needs to take a long, hard look at what happens in the classroom, what the teachers are allowed to do, but more what interrupts a classroom, who is allowed in there to interrupt the class day, the schedule that the teachers have set up. That superintendent needs to take a long look at that list.
Again, my fellow candidates have hit many of the obvious major things. Tyler mentioned that the superintendent needs thick skin. Yes, someone needs the superintendent. I think the long-term person needs to have commitment to the community. How we can gauge that at the outset, not sure, but there are ways. But it's someone who I think will want to be here for the long haul and help get this facilities process started and well on its way. And see as much of it through as possible. I'd like someone with a management style that is very collaborative and allows the teachers and the other professionals in the district to have a lot of say in what their curriculum is, what their teaching methods are. Teachers do a great job in a world full of rules and standards and tests and guidelines and benchmarks. They have all these things they have to do and all these restrictions on what they can't do, and they manage to do a great job still finding creativity that's necessary. I'd like to see a superintendent who does an awful lot to empower the teachers to explore, to use their expertise and to get things done in the way that they think needs to be done.
I accidentally answered this with my first answer, so just a
Sorry.
brief recap of what I said. Successful experience, strong communicator, strong character, and someone can help us network both private and public sector. So,
Great.
That's
Thank
it.
you.
I would say from my experience that one thing that anyone on the board needs to understand is that it pretty much doesn't matter what decision is made, there is going to be a cohort of people who are not satisfied with that. And that's been one of the very troubling things about being on the board. If I think something about teachers or people who go into education or like people who go into medicine or other things like that, they're in the helping professions and they don't like to make people unhappy. But having been in a position where we considered appointing people or going through an interview process, there's pluses and minuses to anything that's done. So based on that experience, I think that taking some time to be thoughtful about who we look for a permanent superintendent is important, to allow the community to have a chance to have a say. Not that they won't have a say with the interim, but there'll be more time in the process for a permanent superintendent. In addition to that, the average tenure of a superintendent in this country is 3 years. So there's no guarantees. We certainly want to have somebody who stays a long time, but everyone's lives have different factors that enter into it. Aside from that, I think I would agree with most of the things other people have said about someone who is confident in working with the budget, has a good leadership style, is able to engage and work with our teachers, with the community at large. And with that, thank you.
All right, the next question has to do with facilities and the bond process. You'll have 2 minutes. Last fall, the voters in Helena overwhelmingly voted against the proposed facility bond. At the present time, there are no formal efforts to put another bond on the ballot. Where does the district need to go from here? Is another bond necessary? And if it is, how would you work to get voter support, including those voters who may be opposed to the proposal? It's 2 minutes. And we'll start with John Rush.
I'm going to go quickly through a lot of numbers, and I hope that it makes some sense to you. We had a building levy that the money went to help repair different parts of the building. The one from 2007 to 2013, of that money, $1,865 was spent on Central School. The building levy now, which is in effect now, it calls for boilers at Broadwater, Jefferson, Arabia York, CR, Helena Middle for $1.5 million. Roofing at Broadwater, 4Gs, Hawthorne, Jim Darcy, Kessler, Lincoln, Rossiter, Smith, Warren, and the 2 middle schools for $3.7 million. You notice there's 2 schools missing on both lists, and that's Central and Bryant. This would bring us to a total of $5.2 million. If you take that $5.2 million, add $1.9 million, which is the option C for Central, reopening that, and then you take a figure of $4.4 million to do 1/4 of Darcy, you come up with a number of $8.7 million, which you could ask for a bond. When I say 1/4 of Darcy, what I mean, I talked to an engineer. You can make that building, the new building, in force. You'd make one, at the end of it would have the stubs for the electrical and the plumbing. That 5 years later, you'd make the next and next and the next. Sure, it would take 20 years, but at least we could get the show on the road for both Jim and Central and give the boilers and the roofs for all the other schools. Thanks.
Thanks. I definitely agree with John Rush that he makes a good point that we're in a situation now because of a long period of neglecting maintenance, and it's created what seems to be an almost impossible backlog that the money just doesn't seem to be there for. Yes, we do need some bond sooner, not later. What it exactly would look like, I think none of us here still really know exactly. People who had strong positions on the last one, I think, are all going to have to rethink exactly what their positions were and realize no one's going to get everything they want. In fact, most people are not going to get what they want when it happens. We just don't have enough money statutorily to obtain, nor just realistically, politically to ask for, to do everything we want. So we will unfortunately have to make some unpleasant decisions. Generally, as priorities, I think we need classrooms in the valley. I think we need to deal with the central situation in some way. I think we should deal with deferred maintenance and repair the schools we have before we maybe start building new ones nearby or expanding other ones nearby. If the time comes where we have to close schools, consolidate schools, folks aren't going to be happy about that, as you all well know, but we have to do it in a way where we've shown that it is the best option for everybody. We've looked under every stone for other options. We rearranged a jigsaw puzzle of students every way we can. We've looked for every pile of money we possibly can to avoid that. And if we make those kind of decisions, and we will have to make tough decisions, they have to be done right, integrated in considering the students, the community, and everything else.
I think we have kind of two different, we have some short-term issues we need to think through, and we have some longer-term issues we need to think through. My friend Sharon Haugen's in the audience. She's the director of planning here in Helena, and she hears me whine about this all the time. I talk about the need for taller, valuable buildings in town. And what that does is it provides a tax base to help support our schools. Now, we can't do that overnight. That would be a long-term process. But without that business tax base to help support these needs, all of the burden falls on the homeowners. And as you know, the 60 or so people here are pretty well aware, there's not a ton of money in Helena. There's a finite amount of money, and it's tough. It's tough sometimes. If you look at your property tax bill, it's going to go up for this, or it's going to go up for the fairgrounds, or it's going to go up for the jail, and you look at that and you think, boy, how are we going to keep doing this? How are we going to keep paying for that? So the long-term solution is we need some valuable buildings in town, because that's where a big chunk of our money comes from. We need those property taxes. It needs to be businesses with value coming to Helena. Short-term, we haven't built a new school in a while. I went to 4Gs. I was born in 82, so went there in 86. It was the newest school in town. I think it was built in 78, 77. My two daughters that are in school now also go to 4Gs. It's still the newest school in town. So that means for roughly 40 years we haven't built a school. If you just do the math on this, you can say, okay, we have 15 schools in town. If you rebuilt one every 10 years, it would take 150 years to rebuild all our schools. Well, the design life of buildings isn't 150 years. It's probably a little less than that. It's probably around 100 years. So you need to look at something short term. We're going to be looking at bonds every 10 years or so if you're going to maintain 15 schools. Not that that's bad, not that that's not something we could do, but I think Helena was a little frustrated that they didn't understand the long-term plan for the bond. I think people in Helena are okay standing in line if they know how long the line is. So if you said this school now, that school then, this school then, you're at least willing to put this down. Not that you can bind future boards or anything, but I think we needed a long-term plan. There's some short-term things we need to take care of, but there are some other issues outside of the school's control that we got to network and get our handle on.
Thank you. There are a lot of complexities about the facilities issue. And one of the issues, say, to address Central School is that one thing that nobody seemed to have understood until a day when an engineer came and said, this building is not safe, no one can be in it. And it wasn't that nobody had done anything to Central School over the time. It was that from the day it was built, it was unsafe. The understanding of how earthquakes move through the soils has changed, and there's a greater understanding of that, and that was the reality. For the board at the time, The repairs necessary to reopen Central School required an extensive amount of money, but also, if that building were to be renovated, all of those repairs would have been torn out because we would have then had to make the school ADA compliant, put in fire suppression, new wiring for technology. And so to take out the $2 million to repair the school in order to renovate the building was something that, since we were at the beginning of in the middle of the facilities discussion, it seemed to make the most sense to have a safe place for the students to go and to address that in the bond. My understanding about the building reserve levy was that the first one was passed in the 80s, and it was for the new phone system. That phone system now needs to be replaced. You can only get the parts on eBay, and we have some serious security issues that would be addressed by the new phone system that was proposed as part of the bond. And that gets around to the fact that the facilities issue is very complicated. And also, our community has to make some decisions. I know when I came on the board, I was told, well, if you do something at one side of town, you have to do it at the other side of town. And so facilities need to be addressed, but it continues to need community involvement and arriving at an appropriate decision. Thank you.
What I would suggest is to go back to when this process all started with the Mosaic report and line everything up and do some sort of triage. And I believe the bond failed last time for two fundamental reasons. One, it was too much money, and number two, there was something on the bond that everyone could disagree with. And some people didn't think we should rebuild Central School. Other people didn't understand why we should rebuild Smith School. Well, I've been on several of the facility tours this past year, and it's obvious that drastic surgery needs to be done on some of these buildings. Drastic meaning tear them down and build a new one. But I would try and maybe come up with a plan that splits everything into thirds. First third we do X, next third Y, and last third do Z over let's say a 10-year period, where take the most immediate needs first, which would be space in the valley, and then at the same time we do have to deal with technology. Apparently is old, and we can do some of that in all of the schools. But also we need to think about right-sizing the district. We have 11 K-5 schools, and as I understand it, the ideal size, a lot of educators like this 4-3 plan, where there are 4 units of K through 2, 3 classrooms of 3, 4, and 5. Well, if that's the ideal, then we only need like 9 elementary schools, not 11. But we also, there's a huge support for neighborhood schools, so those have to be wrestled with.
Thank you. The next two questions have to do with community relations, and here's the first question, and Sanjay, you'll begin. You have 90 seconds. The bond process revealed a very divided community and what many people call a trust deficit when it comes to the district administration and the board. What ideas would you have for rebuilding and restoring the trust of the community?
Yeah, there was some trust issues. They might be a little misplaced at this point, because I think everyone on the board and involved and everyone here has the best interest of the district in mind, and the board did make tough choices in presenting the bond they did, and it didn't pass, and it's no one's fault at this point. Here we are. We need to look forward. As far as trust, we need a whatever the bond is, it has to be explained really straight up to the folks. And if you're gonna, the neighborhood schools that, yes, a lot of people are gonna fight to the death for their neighborhood schools. Well, you're gonna have to kind of not beat around the bush and just explain, yes, this is it, this is why we're doing it. I think in the last bond there was a couple of parallel stories going on which were incompatible. One was that we absolutely needed to move towards 4-3 schools because of various reasons. They're the best schools. We can't afford all these elementary schools, and these smaller schools are doomed to be closed sooner or later. There was another line of thinking I heard, and you can look to district materials and this that said, oh, no schools are closing. This bond isn't going to close any schools. So I think the district has to find one vision, one story, and stick to it.
Ask the question one more time.
The
Pardon?
question has to do with the divided community, what many people call a trust deficit when it comes to the district administration and the board. What ideas would you have for rebuilding and restoring the trust of the community?
Divided community. Gosh. So, I mean, one of my favorite parts about Helena is how united we are. I don't know if I saw us as divided. I think there were some people that didn't like or were worried about losing their neighborhood schools. I don't know if that necessarily means it's a divided community. And there was a vote. Some people voted for it. Some people voted against it. I don't know that it necessarily divided us. I think the people understand the needs. I think they'll come together if they see something they want to approve, and they'll approve it. I didn't have a trust deficit. I thought that some board members agreed with each other. Some disagreed. I listened to people who opposed the bond. I listened to people who were for it. I thought a lot of people spoke their mind on the issue. I'm not positive we came up with a great plan. I don't know that it was a long process. I don't know that it was the best process. I mean, it's going to have to be a community process as you work towards that. But I highly doubt anything will divide this community. And I think people will be honest about what we're trying to move forward. And if we do move forward a bond, people will then get a chance to look at it and vote for it on its merits. And hopefully if we push one forward, we come up with one that's a good one and people like.
After the time that we started working on a bond, Missoula began a process of working on a bond. And theirs passed, ours did not. I've had an opportunity to understand some of the approaches that Missoula took, and they started with teachers and principals and community members. And I think that really enabled them to have a better way of communicating what was going on to the community and to maintain an engagement with everyone in the process. Our families, other community members look to the teachers to let them know what's going on in schools, to dispel any concerns that they have, answer questions. And I think that we really missed the boat when we didn't do a better job of engaging our teachers. And that's something that I would really be in favor of, because not only do we have to consider perhaps closing some schools at some point, and that was one part of their process in addressing what they saw as what they would like for the future. They also had to answer the question, what if your school has to be closed? How do you think that would look? And I think it's important that everybody take ownership of the reality that we live in. And as in addition to perhaps changing boundaries and some of the other tough conversations that we may have to have. I think we are united overall. We all, when any surveys are done, the number one thing is we want a great education for our kids. And I think that we're united in that, and that will help us get through this. Thank you.
We were a bit divided in the last bond, and it concerned me because we're one economic unit, and the city, within the city limits and outside the city limits, we're one economic unit. We have friends and neighbors, bosses, co-workers, customers, and so on. We all interact together, and that needs to be clearly stated and understood. But so how you solve the trust problem is just keep talking, and be clear on and get some buy-in on what the issues are, and feed people information that's clear and understandable, and what the school is faced with, because I mean, we do have a demographic issue that obviously families aren't as big as they used to be. You know, what was once a 300 kids in a boundary area is now 170. And what was used to be 170 kids in boundary areas now 500. You know, so we have to readjust or think about how we adjust the number of seats in the different parts of the district. But just clear talk is the best that I can offer.
I would like to go over some notes that I had on the communications through the district. A couple statements were made by the administration. Number one, that the new boundaries for the elementaries were not to be announced till after the bond was passed. That was printed in the IR 11/20/2013. The May Butler was to be closed, but it was never announced where the new administration building was supposed to be located. And starting with Mosaic study, there were 9 different proposals for the bond. That would confuse anybody. And there were also, I believe, well, the 9th one was to do nothing. I believe there were 7 alternatives for Central School. You had to really pay attention to understand, and if you don't understand what's going on, you just put it down and say, I'm not going to vote for it, I don't understand what the heck's going on. As far as the distribution of students, one thing has to be remembered, that someone decided that the railroad tracks would be the dividing between the valley and not. Now, people living in Sun Haven, do you suppose those people are valley people or city people? But they live on the north side of the tracks.
Thank you. This is a follow-up question to the one you just answered. So, in a broader sense, what role does the community play in shaping the future of the Helena schools? Tyler, you'll start, and you'll have 90 seconds.
That's a good follow-up question. I think the community plays a really important role. I think this process is going to go through a community process very similar to what you do if there was rule changes to codes at city level. That process has to involve input and sharing of ideas with the community. The community needs to be a big part of solutions. They need to be a big part of understanding the problems. One of the toughest things to talk about is when you say closing or consolidating schools. I had to explain to my wife that they're going to close 4 Georgians, she would immediately be upset. If I had to explain to my wife that they are going to build a new 4 Georgians that has a larger boundary, she would be pretty open to that. But that needs to be part of a community process. If they decide that Hawthorne, or if the community decides that Central, or if they decide that Jefferson, if any of those areas are better served with one school, it should come from that area. That group of folks should say, we think one school will serve this area better. It shouldn't necessarily come from the board trying to push an idea onto them. Now, once the data's there and a decision has to be made, eventually you come down to a vote and you move it forward. But I think the community needs to play a bigger role in solving these problems if we're going to come up with a bond that's going to pass. And that role might mean paying for it. You know, if it's a lot of money to pay for what we want, then it's a lot of money, and we got to decide that.
One thing that hasn't been mentioned so far this evening are our middle schools. Because when we first started to look at our facilities issues, doing something about the middle schools was one of the priorities. And when we looked at the large needs of the existing schools, the changes that we considered, it quickly became apparent that there wasn't enough bonding capacity to do everything. And that the issues at the middle school still have not changed. Our community has still not decided where we stand on things. I know from doing a lot of research that at any issue regarding the schools, there's research that supports just about anything you could think of, and research that is critical of just about anything you can think of. And so I think that comes back to working with our teachers, our principals, and also engaging the members of the community to determine what is the best fit for Helena. But to say look at the elementary district as K-5 and not considering our middle schools would be very short-sighted. I know we've had some conversations about K-8, and then there were, because if you have a K-8, you have to have soccer fields and things like that. So it's not something that would fit everywhere, but I've heard people mention that again. So I think there are still a lot of different possibilities, but better engagement with the community is, I think, where we need to focus.
This is hard to engage the community. There are 32,000 voters in the school district, and half of them voted on the bond. So it's, how do we reach all those people is the question. Or how do we get their input? Well, there's ways you do that. You hire some folks and you round up, do some random sample focus groups. You do a pencil and paper survey with some carefully crafted questions, or pose, or let the worst way is to let people write letters to the editor, because then sorry that's because the only people that are really involved are going to do that, and the newspaper only has so much room to publish those letters. So and I've advocated, and I believe the district had this in mind, it was to do a pencil and paper survey to find out, to get community input. We did the listening session, this district did the listening sessions last fall, that I went to one, and what we heard there was a lot of the things that were actually in the last bond, neighborhood schools and so on. So the community needs to play a role, but reaching them will cost money. Thank you.
This is a question I don't think has an answer, and I'll tell you two little stories. There was a young man I met. He lived out by Jim Darcy. He was so proud of himself. He'd been able to buy his first house. It was a repossession. He was happy that he could put his family in this house, and he was just making the payments, just able to squeak by. And all he said to me was, I'll tell you what I think of that school bond. I can't afford a tax raise. That was it. That's all he wanted to address. There was another person out there who said to me, I really don't care about this bond because my kid is a third grader at Jim Darcy, and in a couple of years he'll be out, so I don't care. It seems fine to me. How are you going to get through to those people? I don't know. One last point is that Mr. Beaver has been the head of the facilities committee for a long time, and I've gone on most of the tours of the schools with him. And there's me, a couple trustees, maybe one other person, except for the last time when we had, a dozen central folks. No one comes to those meetings. How you get them there? Frankly, I don't know.
One way you get them there is you have a lot of them at times, other than the times when most parents with kids are working. I realize that's really tricky because everyone has all sorts of different schedules. For some parents, it's better to meet at 8 a.m., others at 7 at night. It is a tough question, and I just want to get to one thing Libby said, which is right on the money. The Mosaic report talked about a need for a middle school, and then as years went, a new middle school, which seems right to me. And I'm not here to talk about specifics on the plan right now, but like it or not, the story kind of changed. We had a lot of faith in the Mosaic report. That was our guidepost for a while. Now it's 3+ years old. Has great ideas. Is the data in it even good anymore? I don't know. It's tricky to get folks involved. Parents are real busy. We have 1 job, 2 jobs, multiple kids. There's ways to help a little bit. One way I think doesn't really help is, for instance, having full-day board retreats with no agenda. I'm not sure how that empowers the public to stay involved. Not sure how it conforms with open meetings laws either, but that's another thing. I'd make one very small promise while I'm here, and that's that if I'm on the board, I'll write about every meeting on my Facebook or my blog or whatever it is. I've done it before. I used to be a professional reporter. I know the basics of how to do these kind of things. Not that the IR and other folks' coverage isn't isn't more than adequate, but I think that's something board members could do, is just jump right in and communicate directly with the public and engage them that way.
All right. Libby, you'll respond to this next question first. Recently, there's been a lot of discussion about school suicide. And one of the questions that people want to hear your collective response to is, what is the role of the schools in student mental health? You have 90 seconds.
This, for some, is a controversial issue. That can be a very private matter for some families, for some individuals. But the reality is that our schools are struggling with a large number of students with mental health needs, and that impacts their ability to learn as well as the other classmates. And the district has taken this very seriously and has systems of support in place to address the needs of these students. They can be referred by their teacher, by a parent, by other staff in the district, and referrals are made to outside healthcare providers, mental health care providers, to ensure that those students get the support that they need. However, people sometimes can hide those things. They can stay hidden, and if you're not familiar with the signs for this, they can be overlooked, missed. The district has numerous programs that do address supporting students, families, and teachers in this area, and we're looking at bringing in a new program based on one that was very successful in Europe called YAMS, which will come from, it's now at the university, MSU. The trainers will come from Sweden. It's been a very effective program, and we've shared that information with East Helena, and we're looking forward to providing more support for our students who struggle with these issues.
That's really a difficult question because there's so many demands on the schools. And the school's major purpose is to teach children, to provide an education. But there are barriers to the education, and they range. We feed the children so that they can learn on a full stomach. We do have school counselors. We have school nurses. The school nurses is kind of triage or immediate care on scrapes and bruises and so on, and maybe administering medications. We have school counselors, but they're trained as academic counselors, not mental health counselors. At the presentation of the board meeting, the school made by the school counselors about the suicide prevention efforts, they mentioned we're triage, that they're not equipped to provide mental health help. The district does contract with Intermountain to provide some, I'm not real clear on exactly what they do, but it's some sort of mental health intervention. So the school, probably the school role, I believe, just has to be that triage. Some training to teachers and others and staff on things to look for, but referral is the best that we can do.
The district has not always been level on how they've staffed the district for students in need such as that. And let me point out that the State Board of Ed in 2013 put this district on intensive assistance process, which means they were going to take away our accreditation because the school district had hired social workers instead of counselors, and were under the number of counselors that were mandated by the state. This made a big difference, and we have to make sure this doesn't happen again. Thankfully, the administration was able to talk the state school board out of this and to promise that they would get the counselors to up to the state standards. one other thing about the suicide is, how young do you address this subject to students? First grade, third grade, fifth grade? That's a real tough one, and I'm not sure that we have come to a conclusion in order to bring in these programs such as suicide prevention. At what age?
I think I've personally had a skepticism of the government or the schools engaging in mental health and looking at my kids and deciding they have a certain pathology and they need a certain treatment or kind of thing. And I think a lot of people share that view. However, it's something that we have to do, and it's something I have to get past and other parents have to get past. We look at their eyes, we test their hearing, we make sure they're fed, we make sure they're vaccinated. Mental health is another thing like that. I realize that it really strikes home on the privacy thing. When there was a bill in the legislature last session saying maybe we should mandate mental health testing in all schools of some degree, I kind of had an initial visceral reaction like, no, we can't let the school go there. And a lot of parents will think the same thing. But we do have to go there. It's going to be a tough step, and we have to do it right and carefully. And as John says, do we want to start telling first graders about suicide? Maybe not, but we might want to tell them about how to seek help if they're looking for it, and that there's ways to introduce kids and parents to the kind of resources and recognize things without giving them ideas about suicide. So it is a place we have to go and push fairly hard. And as for bullying, I just want to say we need to have some real teeth in a bullying policy that gets bullies out of the classroom.
I think on this topic, I think schools are similar to the private sector, where you need to have defined and clear roles and goals. The school can't do everything. We also hear a common theme for me that I think we need to break down some of our silos. I think we need partners to help us with this. I think we need partners from the county. I think we need partners from the state. And I think we need partners from Department of Health and Department of Health and Services, federal. Someone mentioned Intermountain Children's Home. I don't think we want to try to tackle every problem alone. I think we want to work with the community, and we need some assistance on some of these. Then we need to go work on getting that assistance. I think at a minimum, on this particular topic, the education, both staff and peer education, is critical. And when you have defined and clear roles and goals, you'll know who's doing it. You'll know at what level they're doing it, and the community will know at what level they're doing it. And you need to execute that plan once you put it together.
Thank you. Second to the last question, and John McEwen, you'll go first. This has to do with staff morale. A number of people are concerned about staff morale, both of building administrators and of staff in the buildings. What ideas might you have to help address that issue?
Well, the first thing I'd want to find out is what is the morale? And I suppose as a school board member, and I think about that, I'm two-level, as if we're talking about teachers and teacher aides, the school board is 2 levels removed in the chain of command from managing school staff. So I'd be interested in finding out the extent of morale, good or bad, and maybe some understanding as to why morale might be low. I mean, based on a newspaper article, I think it was this morning or yesterday, about Central School, a lot of turnover there, and that's facility issues, near as I can tell. And the school board's impact on that, the solution might be 2 or 3 years down the road in order for that morale to improve. So the school board, boy, they're just that's a tough one because of the separation, because we're volunteer. The board is volunteer, and they're making long-term policies and making budgets and so on. And so the supervision of staff is left to principals.
I have to get back to a subject that I talked about before. The teachers are graded on the results of their students. However, the teachers do not control how their classroom is run as to whom has access, how much, what time those folks do. We hear about PLCs, that's your Monday afternoon early release, and how they've helped the academics of our school district, but I don't see the connection there. There has not been a proven connection. And again, I've talked to some teachers who say, well, we do share some ideas, and others who say, well, I get a lot of knitting done during that time. For us to improve staff morale, we do have to limit the time in the classroom by outside groups. I mean nonprofits, anyone you can think of who is not there genuinely to help the teacher improve the education of the children. That's how you improve morale.
It's tough to gauge exactly what the morale is. I've heard from some teachers recently that they say morale is terrible. I've heard other teachers say the exact opposite, that things are really, really pretty good, or at least no worse than they are any place you have the difficult job of actually teaching children. I think what I do hear from teachers consistently, though, is having freedom, not being restricted by the task in front of them, allowing them to use creative teaching methods. I know John just spoke about not letting too many folks kind of outside things into the classroom that are distractions. I have a slightly opposite view. I like the idea of, I kind of think the classroom is really a starting point for the educational experience, and it's not the whole thing, and it's not the end point. And with certainly not everyone, but I welcome some area experts and stuff, and DARE and other folks from other elements other than the traditional classroom structure coming in and doing things. So I think that's something the district can do. I think that's something the superintendent and principals can work on, is empowering the teachers to be able to make decisions on the fly that are right and use creative means. I think that empowerment is the key to improving morale.
Joe, could you give me that question one more time?
A number of people are concerned about staff morale, both of building administrators and of staff in the buildings. What ideas might you have to help improve staff morale?
Well, my dad used to be super grumpy because Helena High didn't have air conditioning, so you could put air conditioning in Helena High. He'd come home pretty ornery about that one. One of the greatest thing about teachers is, and it's a negative, is you don't get paid very much. Which means if you're in it to help the kids. So there's not a lot of teachers you run into that have, or at least in my experience, I mean, my teachers or the teachers that have been teaching my kids, they're great. I mean, they're excited, they're energetic, they're happy to be there, they're working hard. So from what I can tell, those individuals inside of the building, they're doing a wonderful job, both in performance and in how they communicate to you. Building administration could be a little difficult. If you only have 10 pennies and you need 20 pennies, it's tough to be successful at that job. So I could see that being frustrating. So if they need more than they have to function, I could see that causing some morale issues. But I don't interact personally with building administrators, so I guess I haven't had the experience yet. But the teachers that I communicate with, and they're great people, seem super happy.
This topic did come up to the board, and we did discuss that perhaps we could have an anonymous survey to find out, is there truly teacher dissatisfaction? On another note, I remember Dr. Colgan saying when he first came in, somebody approached him about some program that would be great to present at the schools, and then he learned that it was the principals are those gatekeepers. here in our district, and I think that really allows for the individuality of each of our schools to come about. They themselves are empowered to decide what programs they want to have, how they handle having visitors in the classroom. I know, we've made a lot of strides. We've introduced more rigor in our classrooms, and the teachers and the principals are very protective of their teaching time. And that's something that is important to respect. And I think that we do have to look to the teachers, though, to communicate with the administration what challenges there are. Whenever we go to on the fourth Tuesday of every month, we have a work session at the schools during the school year, and my colleague Serge Prezo always asks, what do you need here? What is it that we could look to provide for you? And when it's possible, we work on seeing how we can fit that into the budget or find other ways to address those concerns.
Okay, thank you. This is our last question, and it has to do with budget. What experience have each of you had with budgets, and how will you know whether the budget put before the board would be an effective budget for our school system? And we'll start with John Rush, and you have 90 seconds.
The experience I had with budget was when I worked with telephone company. I was the manager of something called PICS DCPR. I won't go into that. But I was responsible for the books of approximately $350 million worth of equipment that came into the state and left the state for all the central offices within the state of Montana for Mountain Bell, and then became U.S. West and onward and onward. That's my budget experience. Those books had to be balanced. We had to account for that equipment as it went in, as it went out, the depreciation of that equipment, and where it went to after it left the state, either to the junkyard or to another state that needed that piece of equipment that we no longer needed. That is my budget experience. I have looked at the budget of this school district quite a lot. It is a challenge. I won't, and the funding of school districts is one heck of a challenge because they come from dozens of sources. I have been looking at those ever since I was a trustee back in the mid-90s.
I definitely do not have the accounting and budgeting skills and experience some folks on the board and some folks at this table have. I have looked at closely at many budgets from the state, city government, county, and on up and down the line of annual reports of corporations, a lot of different things. So I have certainly some experience. I'm not intimidated by big spreadsheets. I'm in the process of trying to look through this budget line by line, see if anything jumps out at me. I'm not sure I need to be the auditor of this this budget, but I'm gonna do what I can. I will definitely agree with John on another thing. The school funding mechanism on the state level is the absolutely most complicated, convoluted way to figure out an amount of money that's going to a school that any of you will ever see. Everything else is easier. Utilities, higher education, they're all simpler. I've never really figured it out, and I'm not sure. There's a half dozen people in the state who really know it backwards and forwards, so that in itself is really complicated. I'm not sure how we get out of that, but our own budget is a little more manageable, and it does need and will get solid look.
So I have definitely more experience in the private sector budgeting than I do public sector. Some things that are really easy in the private sector, but not so much in the public sector. I mean, when you're in the private sector, you can invest to generate new revenue. You can research and develop. You can acquire. You can cut staff. You can cut programs for the sake of who the owner is or who the shareholder is or what the interest of the company is. You can't do that in the public sector. The stakeholder is the community. You have to do the things that the community needs or that the community wants. So from a budgeting standpoint, the most that I think I can bring to the table to help the board is by increasing the size of our shovel, increasing the amount of our income. I would like to focus on the school board being somewhat outspoken that we need valuable business property in town that generates a lot of tax revenue, and then it comes off our shoulders as homeowners, as residents. If the businesses own large valuable buildings, a big chunk of that comes to the schools, that's a bigger shovel. So I think that's where I can add some to it. The state funding, I think it's worth going and fighting the fight at the state level to try to get as much assistance as possible. I don't think we want to go at this alone. Again, I keep talking about the importance of networking with our neighbors and our friends. The state can be a partner in our funding. Federal can be a partner in our funding. So I don't think it's all on our current residents, or needs to all be on our current residents. I think we got to be a little innovative in how we look at generating revenue, both short-term and long-term.
Well, I do agree with Tyler in that. One of the disadvantages of being the state capital is that a lot of our property is owned by the state government. We have a lot of nonprofits and they don't pay taxes. And that puts a heavy burden on our property owners, but we certainly are not unique. I've talked to people who live in other states and they've made the same lament that so much of their property taxes go to schools. And that is a challenge, as we have 72% of our households who do not have children in the school district. On the other hand, we were all educated, and I think it's sort of our legacy to pass on the opportunity for a good education to our children. I would also agree with Sanjay. The state funding mechanism for education is very convoluted, and with each session it gets more so because they don't go back and simplify things. They just make what it is already there more complicated. I was at a meeting today, and the interim funding group of the legislature has asked for a primer on one certain area of funding, which is not even a state program, it's a federal program because things were so complicated for them. So, although I think I have been to the legislature to testify, and I would continue to do so, Senate Bill 175 did a lot to increase our funding for schools, and there are more opportunities to work with the legislature. And then in addition, I would say that Dr. Colgan brought a great understanding of budgetary work when he came, and that was what enabled us to find a way to meet the curricular needs that we did with the English language arts curriculum. Thank you.
Kim Harris, the school's business manager, is retiring, and I ran into a friend of mine who knows a ton about school funding. He suggested I withdraw immediately from the race. But my budgeting experience, I have about 30 years of that. Being a manager inside state government, I had to put together a budget each 2 years. As division administrator, I then presented a budget to the legislative committee on my budget. The two other bits of budget that I had to put together was a proposal for state employee pay increases, and I oversaw those calculations and made that presentation to the governor, as well as then the legislative finance committees on the costs of and asking for appropriations to increase state employee pay. And also under my watch was the state employee health plan, which at the time I retired was about a $50 million spend each year on state employee claims, health claims. So pretty well versed in public budgeting. And also in my public administration education, I actually took a class on public budgeting. So.
All right, thank you. We actually finished with about a minute and a half left before 7 o'clock, I think. So that's the end of our formal questions. A reminder that these candidates will stay for another half hour after the meeting. I'd like to thank the candidates themselves for taking the initiative to run for the school board. It's a very important job. This is an important election, so thanks to all of you. Thanks to our audience for showing up tonight. Your vote's important, and so I appreciate you becoming informed and taking this election seriously. And thanks to the Independent Record. They've done a great job in highlighting this event and drawing attention to the importance of the election, I think they deserve a hand also. So thank you.